Good morning, everyone. Just making sure, can you see my screen? All right. Okay, great. So today we'll be talking about creating forms for SharePoint Online. Now, there are probably quite a few of you who are still using SharePoint on premises, and things are going to be very different in the cloud or on the cloud. And today what we'll be talking about is really the differences between what's available on premises and what's on the cloud using SharePoint Online and Office 365. And we'll focus on building forms using the built-in capabilities of SharePoint Online and some of the other functionalities that are available. So in SharePoint on premises, whether it's SharePoint 2013, 2016, 2019, the only true option that you have to customize forms without writing any code is to use something that's called InfoPath. And InfoPath is probably one of my favorite products, but unfortunately, Microsoft has decided that they're going to start retiring InfoPath in future versions of SharePoint. InfoPath will still be supported until 2026, so we're good for the next little while. But moving forward, Microsoft will want to start using a new functionality that will be available in SharePoint Online. Of course, you're still able to build forms from scratch using custom code, JavaScript, HTML, things like that. But what we're trying to do today is to avoid using custom code, using the built-in functionality of the system. In the cloud, Office 365 is the subscription that offers a lot of functionality, not just SharePoint, as you can see, but things like email, Dynamic 365, Forms, OneDrive, OneNote, all these other things. Today, we'll be focusing on this one tiny little area of Office 365, which is called SharePoint. But SharePoint is starting to focus what it does. Before, SharePoint on premises used to be up to 57 different products. Pretty much all the products you see here had a version of it somewhere in SharePoint Online, SharePoint on premises, excuse me. But when we're moving to SharePoint Online, the various products are starting to focus into what they do best. And the reason for that is because when you're working online, you have a team of Microsoft developers and product managers that are working all the time to deliver new functionality. The SharePoint team, for example, can deliver new functionality every day, several times a day, and they can release it to production several times a day. And because you're in the cloud, you get all that new functionality pretty much as soon as it's available and as soon as it's been tested extensively and regression tested. If SharePoint continued to have all the functionality that it used to have on premises, which included workflows and forms and things like that, it would be a lot more difficult for the product teams to continue to innovate at the speed at which they innovate. So that's why the products have been separated into smaller products. That's why, for example, the form functionality of SharePoint is now moving to something called PowerUps. And PowerUps is just another thing that's available through Office 365 that is designed to provide, I don't want to say the replacement for InfoPath because Microsoft will be mad at me for saying that, but it's really where the next step of InfoPath and the next steps of forms within SharePoint. The great thing about moving PowerUps to a different product that integrates with SharePoint is that now these forms are also available for all the other products within Office 365. So if you wanted to customize your forms for Dynamics 365, you can actually use PowerUps as well. In fact, the newer versions of Dynamics 365, all the screens and all the forms are built using PowerUps. So what we'll be talking about today is specifically to customize SharePoint forms, but just keep in mind that as I'm showing some of the features using PowerUps, that you'll also be able to use PowerUps for other things in Office 365. So PowerUps is, again, it's a kind of different product that's available part of Office 365. Now, the next slide is very ugly, and I apologize, but that's what I wanted to show here is when you use Office 365 and you have an Office 365 subscription, these are the subscription levels that include PowerUps for Office 365. So there's no additional cost for using PowerUps for Office 365 as long as you're within those tenants. Now, there are some limitations in terms of how many thousands of flows a user can run per month and things like that, depending on the subscription level. But one of the things that we want to keep in mind here is that Microsoft has announced that in October they will be changing the licensing model as well. And one of the reasons why they want to change the licensing model is because they want to make it easier for you to use PowerUps as a standalone platform. So let's say you wanted to build a form for your reception desk for visitors to sign in. It doesn't use SharePoint, it doesn't use anything like that. It's a form on its own that talks to a database, or maybe it talks to your CRM behind the scene. Microsoft's new licensing model that will come in October will allow you to start building these applications, and there will be different prices, either on a per app basis or per user basis as well. But we'll still be able to continue to use the PowerUps for Office 365 with SharePoint. So the form we'll be talking about today for this example is a fictitious form, but it's probably a form that looks familiar for a lot of people. This is a vacation request form that I found somewhere online, and I just made it, I pretended that it belongs to Point Alliance. But so this is a typical vacation request form, right? That asks about the employee name and their employee number. It probably shouldn't ask for social security number, but the sample that I found had it, so I thought I should point it out. It's a very scary thing to ask people that information. And then the type of absence requested, as well as from what time to what time and what are the reasons for your absence. And then usually these forms will have something like the employee needs to sign the form, and then they need to send it to the manager to approve it. The manager needs to sign it, and then usually the office internally, whoever handles the vacation request form, might have some additional information, like for example, where they entered it, when they entered it, and things like that. But when we look at forms from paper forms that we want to convert to forms that we can use inside of SharePoint and PowerUps, there are some best practices to consider. So for example, one of the things that we should do is, instead of asking all the questions that we were asking before, we should only ask what is necessary. So if we look at the original form that we had, everybody in Office 365 and SharePoint is authenticated. So that means we know exactly who they are. They had to log in to get there, or if they didn't log in when they went to Office 365, they had to log into their workstation in order to access Office 365. So because they're authenticated, we know their name and we know their employee number because it's presumably captured somewhere else. We also don't need to know their department name, and we definitely shouldn't be asking for their social security number. So that's information we don't need to ask. It's there. And the same thing, sometimes we see forms that say, what's the current date, what's the current time? We don't need to ask for that information, because when the record gets created, when the form gets submitted, we'll automatically capture this information. We also don't need to ask for things like for office use only, because obviously it's for the office. So when I see this on a form, it says for office use only, please do not write, I usually write okay. But this is what we're trying to avoid here. We're trying to avoid asking for information that users shouldn't display or shouldn't see. The second best practice here is hide the business rules from your form, the business rules inside your forms. So if we look back at our vacation request form, there's a few rules here that we should highlight that are kind of implied. And normally what we do when we want to teach people about how to fill these forms is we ask everybody to come to a training session. You know, let's spend half an hour, and we'll teach you how to fill your vacation request form. And next time the rules change, then we need to retrain everybody because the rules have changed. So for example here, if we look at the other, maybe what we need to do is when you select other, maybe we need to ask, well, what is the other type of absence here? The other thing that we can probably do is the from date. We probably don't want to allow people to put a date in the past, unless maybe if they were sick, then maybe we want to allow them to put a date in the past. And we probably don't want the to date to be greater than the from date. So we kind of want to have a connection here between the two. There's other business rules that we can discuss here, but I think this illustrates some of the business rules we're trying to do. And then probably one of the other things to consider is hide the business process in your workflows. So again, we don't want to have to send our users or employees who have to fill the vacation request form or any forms for that matter to training because you now have some business processes that change. You know, right now we have the manager's approval. We can get rid of that whole process because what we'll do is behind the scenes, we can use a workflow to automatically submit the form for the manager, and the manager can approve and reject. But think about those other types of forms that we have, for example, expense forms and things like that, where we say, oh, well, if your expense is greater than this amount, then it needs to be approved by your manager and your manager's manager, the president, or, whatever the levels that you have in your business process. But when those rules change, when the spending limit changes or things like that, again, we don't want to have to retrain users just because the rules have changed. So wouldn't it be great if we were able to just hide all that and the form automatically knows, okay, this expense was greater than this amount, therefore it needs to be routed to the president after the manager approved it, and so on. So enough talking about how to do this. Let's actually show you how it works. So I will launch SharePoint Online, and I will go to our work site. And our work site is where our employees go, because they work at Point Alliance. So those are things that are available to them. For example, things like benefits, work and life, participating in the community, and things like that. So we put all these things in one place. And for the purpose of this example, what I will be doing is we'll be using a vacation request form. So what I did before this presentation is I created a list in SharePoint that allows me to request for the reasons for the absence, the type of absence, the from date, the to date, and then it captures automatically when it was created, who created it, and then I have another little field here which is to capture what other type of absence did you use. Now, normally, if I just went to SharePoint and I created the form and I clicked on New, I would get a form that looks like this. This is the out-of-the-box form that's available with SharePoint, and it allows me to capture information. So I'll just do test before custom form, type of absence. I'll pick from a drop-down list, and that was a morbid example I picked, but it's the first one that came under my mouse. So we'll put an absence here, and we'll put, we don't need to ask for type, and it's asking for attachments. I'm not planning on using attachments, but you can see here some of the things that we don't like is I can easily go and submit a date that started before my from date. So my absence stopped before it even started. Maybe that's a great idea if I want to trick the accounting system to pay me more, but in real life, we probably don't want to allow these things. And asking for other when I haven't picked the choice other here probably shouldn't happen. Unfortunately, there are no ways to customize this form unless I want to either write a lot of code to customize this, or I can use PowerUps. And so this option is available on every list, and you may have noticed when I clicked on the edit, it was also available here. So let's click on that. And so if I click on customize with PowerUps, what it does is it will launch a different product, which is called PowerUps, and it will actually connect my PowerUps form, or my SharePoint form, sorry, to PowerUps. Now, again, as I mentioned before, PowerUps is designed to integrate with many products, not just SharePoint. So one of the things that it's doing here is it's building a standard PowerUps form, and it's connecting to SharePoint behind the scene and creating a data source that points to the SharePoint list. As you see here, it automatically pulled all the fields from my list, and it automatically kind of tried to figure out, well, this is the order in which the fields were created, so that's probably what you'd like. Let me pull my notes here to make sure that I don't forget anything, but let's start by the attachments. I don't need the attachments, so I will get rid of that. Now, let's quickly show you what happened here. When SharePoint told PowerUps, hey, I need a form to be customized, it sent the information about how to connect to SharePoint, and it sent the information about all the fields. And then PowerUps built this form for us, and it automatically decided, okay, well, here's the fields that are available inside this data source. And the data source here, again, it happens to be SharePoint, but in PowerUps, you could be connecting to a database, or you could be connecting to Dynamics or anything like that. And then it pulled the list of fields, and it says, well, here are the fields that are available in your SharePoint list, as well as some information about what type of field they are. For example, here, the from date and to date, it knows that it's a date type data. And it also allows me to select what type of controls that I want to make available for this. So for example here, if I wanted to change the title, I don't want it to be called title, I want it to be called reason for absence, and I want people to have a bit more room to write some information. What I'll do here is I'll change the field to be a multi-line text. And automatically the field is changed. If I go here and I actually click on the control that holds the title for this, what you'll see here is, I'll hide this here quickly. So what you'll see here is I have, every time I select a control, I have some panels that appear. One of the panels here is the panel that sets the properties for this control. So, and there are multiple properties, as you can see. I can control things like the fonts, the size, whether it's visible or not. And then there's even advanced settings. And one of the things that it does here is it says, well, I'm going to take the name that SharePoint gave me, and so that's what parent.displayName means. It's the parent here being SharePoint. So I'm going to take the name that SharePoint gave me, and that's what I'm going to put as the name for this field. But I would like to call this reasons for absence. So I'll tell it to unlock this. Let me change it. It's okay. I know what I'm doing. Let me go here, change this to reason for absence. Okay, and automatically the form gets updated for us. The next thing I probably want to do here is I'm a big fan of testing the form as I go. So what I want to do is I want to go here and preview the form. In order to do that, what I have to do is I have to tell it, if I go to SharePoint itself and I go back to my properties, the default type of form here is set to edit. If I set it to a new form, what it's going to do when I do a preview is it'll automatically preview what the new form will look like. If I had left it to the edit default, it would try to show me what it would look like if I was trying to edit the form, and which is not what we're trying to do right now. Okay, so as you can see here, the type, if I go back to preview here, the type of absence is pulling the information from my SharePoint list, and I still have the rich capability to enter dates and things like that, but I don't have the validation that I was looking for. So let's start putting some rules. So if I go to the date control that was automatically created for me, you'll notice that, again, there are all sorts of information here that's available, all sorts of rules. If I unlock this and I say, show me more options, you'll see there's lots of stuff we can do here. And I know it's probably very overwhelming if it's the first time you're looking at this, but let me just quickly show you an example. If I look at the border color of the date field here, you'll notice that it's saying if the parent has an error or if there's an error, show the regular border, show red, but if there's no errors, show border color. Now, that's not actually how it reads, that's what I just said, but it says here, if the parent error is blank, then show the regular border. If the parent error is not blank, then show the red color. Now we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to change that a little bit. But to make things easier, let's rename this field so we can understand what we're talking about here. So this is the from date. And if I go here and I say, I look for the border again. There you go. I can change this rule here. So for example, what we'll do is we'll say if the, let's say, oops. So if the from date, oops, if the selected date from date is not blank, and the selected date of the from date field is less than today, then show it as red, otherwise show it as the original color. So what I did here is I just changed the original formula a little bit. Oops. So if I change the date here in my preview, what I should see here as I get a red border. So we can build all sorts of logic like this to say, well, okay, so if the date of the absence to is less than the absence from, well, then we should do this, or we should set the visibility of the other type to be hidden if I pick a type of absence of other sorry, if I pick an absence of other, then we should ask, well, what type of other absence did you have? But if I pick any other types, then we don't want to display this. So I would go here and I would set the visibility of the field to hide it. But let's actually, because we only have half an hour, we only had a half an hour, let me show you what happens when I publish this form here. So as you saw here, to publish the form, I just went and said, go back to SharePoint and publish it. Now, if I refresh the form here, let me just refresh this quickly, and I click on new. Oops, it hasn't refreshed yet. If I click on new like I did before, what should start happening, and of course it's doing this to me now because I'm trying to rush this. So let's just try one more time. Usually it happens within a few seconds. All right, it's not letting me do this. Let's see. Oh, actually, it did update. Normally, when it updates, I see a little wait window here, so it just updated faster than I expected. But you see the changes that I made. The reasons for absence has changed. It's a large field, so I can type more information, and the validation logic has also changed. Now, if I had more time, I would have added a little error message here, and I would have added the ability to hide the field. But that's really a really quick example of how I can customize the forms using PowerUps. Now, one of the things that we should mention is that we have started to host an event I believe it's the first Wednesday of every month, called the Toronto Citizen Developers User Group. And it's a user group where we focus on helping people learn about some functionalities like PowerUps and flows and things like that. And it's really intended for people who are not really developers, people who are more advanced users who want to customize functionalities of their business to improve business processes without having to be a developer. So the Citizen Developers User Group is on October 2nd, the first one at 6 p.m. at the Microsoft office in downtown Toronto. If you'd like to learn more about using PowerUps and Flow and customizing SharePoint forms, you're welcome to attend. We'd love to have you there. And this wraps it up for me.